The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the trading post, and Eleanor Hartley stepped down into the dusty Montana Territory settlement with one hand pressed against her swollen belly and the other gripping a worn carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the rough collection of buildings that made up Silver Creek, and she could feel the eyes of every person on the street turning toward her, their gazes dropping to her ringless left hand and then to the obvious curve of her stomach beneath her faded blue traveling dress. She lifted her chin and walked toward the trading post with as much dignity as she could muster, knowing that the whispers had already begun, knowing that she had nowhere else to go. But knowing that the father of her child was 300 miles behind her in St. Louis with his proper wife and his respectable life, completely unaware that the young woman he had seduced with promises of marriage had carried his child all the way to the frontier. Inside the dim interior of the trading post, Eleanor approached the counter where a weathered man with suspicious eyes looked her up and down. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "I can cook, clean, mend, and keep accounts. I worked in my father's store in St. Louis before he passed." The man behind the counter spat tobacco juice into a can. "We do not hire unwed mothers here, miss. This is a respectable establishment." "I can work harder than anyone you have," Eleanor insisted, desperation creeping into her tone. "Please. I only need enough to pay for a room and food until the baby comes. After that, I will work twice as hard." "The answer is no." The man turned his back on her, and Eleanor felt the last of her hope draining away like water through a sieve. She walked back out into the bright sunlight, blinking against the glare and the tears that threatened to fall. The stagecoach was already gone, continuing its route north toward Fort Benton. Eleanor had exactly $2.30 to her name, and according to the rough-looking woman she had asked on the street, a room at the boarding house cost $1 a night. She had enough money for 2 nights, maybe 3 if she did not eat, and then she would be destitute in a town that had already made clear she was not welcome. Eleanor walked slowly down the main street, and past the saloon where painted women lounged on the second-floor balcony, past the blacksmith shop where the clang of hammer on anvil rang out in steady rhythm, past the general store where respectable women in clean aprons gathered their shopping and pointedly looked away from her. At the end of the street stood a small church with peeling white paint, and beyond that, the wilderness stretched out in endless waves of gold and green, mountains rising in the distance like the backbone of the world itself. She sank down onto the church steps, too tired to care any more about dignity or appearances. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder that she was responsible for more than just her own survival now. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to think, tried to plan, but exhaustion and hunger made her thoughts slow and muddled. She had left St. Louis 6 weeks ago when her condition could no longer be hidden, when the landlady had threatened to throw her out, when she had finally accepted that Thomas Whitmore would never leave his wife, would never acknowledge the child they had created during those secret meetings in the storage room of his textile warehouse. She had chosen Montana Territory because it was far away, because she had heard there were opportunities in the West, because she had been foolish enough to believe that distance might somehow equal a fresh start. "You planning on sleeping there all day, or are you actually going to go inside and pray?" The voice was deep and rough, and Eleanor opened her eyes to find a man standing a few feet away, blocking the sun so that he appeared as a massive silhouette against the bright sky. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out more details. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad they seemed to span half the horizon. His hair was dark and fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered and hard, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark beard. He wore buckskin pants and a worn cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. A large hunting knife hung from his belt, and he carried a rifle with the easy familiarity of a man who used it often. "I was resting," Eleanor said, forcing herself to stand despite the way her back ached. "I did not mean to block the steps." The man's eyes, she noticed, were a startling shade of gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. Those eyes traveled over her face, down to her swollen belly, and back up again. Unlike the other residents of Silver Creek, his expression did not show disgust or judgment, only a kind of careful assessment, as if he were evaluating a horse he might buy. "You are the woman who came in on the stage today," he said. It was not a question. Yes. Word travels fast in a small town. They are saying you are alone, pregnant, and looking for work. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn. I suppose they are saying a great deal more than that. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost as if he might smile. They are. Most of it is not worth repeating. What is your name? Eleanor Hartley. And you are? Caleb Stone. I have a cabin about 8 miles north of here, up in the foothills. I trap, hunt, and bring furs down to trade every few weeks. He paused, and those gray eyes studied her again with that same careful intensity. I'm looking for a wife. Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon? A wife, Caleb repeated, his tone matter-of-fact as if he were discussing the weather. I've been living alone for 3 years now, and I'm tired of cooking my own meals and mending my own clothes. I want a woman to keep my house and share my bed. In return, I can offer protection, food, shelter, and my name. His eyes dropped to her belly again. That baby you are carrying will need a father. I can be that father. I am offering marriage before sundown if you are willing. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She gripped the church railing to steady herself. You do not even know me. I could be a terrible person. I could be a thief or a liar or worse. You could be, Caleb agreed, but I do not think so. You have honest eyes, even if you are scared and desperate people make practical decisions, which is what I need. I am not offering romance or love. I'm offering a trade. You need a husband and a home. I need a wife. It is simple. There is nothing simple about marriage, Eleanor said, her voice shaking. That is where you are wrong. Marriage is as simple or as complicated as people make it. I am a simple man with simple needs. I live a hard life in the mountains, but I have never struck a woman, and I never will. I have money saved from my furs, enough to get through the winter and beyond. I can hunt, so we will never starve. I can build, so we will have shelter. What I cannot do is live alone anymore, and you cannot survive here alone with a baby on the way. So I am offering a solution that benefits us both. Eleanor looked at this stranger, this mountain man with his weathered face and his blunt words and his impossible proposal. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was insane, that she could not possibly marry a man she had met 5 minutes ago, that there had to be another option. But as she looked past him at the town of Silver Creek, at the closed doors and the judging eyes and the cold certainty of rejection, she knew there was no other option. She had $2.30, a baby due in approximately 3 months, and nowhere to go. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want your word that you will never raise your hand to me or to this child, and I want your word that once the baby is born, you will treat him or her as your own, with no distinction from any children we might have together. You have my word, Caleb said immediately. I am many things, but I am not a liar, and I am not a man who harms women or children. That baby will be mine in every way that matters, from the moment we speak the vows. Eleanor took a deep breath, and then another. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if offering an opinion on the matter. She thought of Thomas with his smooth lies and his false promises, with his cowardice and his cruelty. This man, Caleb Stone, might be rough and uncivilized, but he was offering her honesty, at least. He was offering her a chance. Yes, she heard herself say, I will marry you. Caleb nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. Good. We will need to find the preacher. He lives in the house behind the church. Can you walk that far? Or should I carry you? I can walk, Eleanor said quickly, alarmed at the thought of being carried by this massive stranger who would soon be her husband. Caleb led the way around the side of the church to a small house with a neat garden. He knocked firmly on the door, and after a moment it opened to reveal an elderly man with kind eyes and a worried expression. Caleb Stone, the preacher said in surprise. I have not seen you in town for nearly 2 months. What brings you here today? I need you to perform a marriage, Reverend Miller, right now, before sundown. The preacher's eyes shifted to Eleanor, taking in her condition with a sharp intake of breath. I see. And this young lady is willing. I am, Eleanor said, stepping forward. My name is Eleanor Hartley, and I am entering this marriage of my own free will. Reverend Miller looked between them, his expression troubled. Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly. Caleb, are you certain about this? You have always been a solitary man. I am certain, Caleb said firmly, and we do not have time for a long discussion. The lady needs a husband before this town tears her to pieces with their talk. Can you marry us or not? The Reverend sighed. Come inside then. We will need 2 witnesses. Let me send my wife to fetch the neighbors. Within 20 minutes, Eleanor found herself standing in the small front room of the Reverend's house with Caleb Stone beside her and 2 curious neighbors watching from the corner. Her carpetbag sat by the door, and she still wore her dusty traveling dress. Nothing about this felt real. Nothing about this felt like the wedding she had imagined as a girl, when she had dreamed of orange blossoms and white lace and a groom who loved her more than life itself. But Caleb stood solid and steady beside her, his presence both intimidating and oddly reassuring. And when Reverend Miller began to speak the familiar words of the marriage ceremony, Eleanor found herself listening with an attention she had never given anything before. These words were binding her life to a stranger's, for better or worse, until death parted them. Do you, Caleb Stone, take this woman, Eleanor Hartley, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Caleb said, his deep voice filling the small room. And do you, ye Eleanor Hartley, take this man, Caleb Stone, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Eleanor's throat was dry. She looked up at Caleb and found him watching her with those steady gray eyes, waiting for her answer without any sign of impatience or doubt. Whatever else he might be, he was a man who had made her a promise and intended to keep it. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest as Caleb turned to face her fully. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. And then he bent down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was surprisingly soft, almost tender. It lasted only a moment, but when he pulled back, Eleanor could still feel the warmth of it. You are my wife now, Caleb said quietly, so only she could hear. That means you are under my protection. No one in this town or anywhere else will harm you or speak ill of you. I give you my word. Eleanor felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. Thank you, she managed to say. Reverend Miller cleared his throat. I will need you both to sign the marriage certificate, and then I will file it with the territorial office when the next mail goes out. They signed the document, Eleanor's signature small and neat, Caleb's bold and sprawling. The witnesses signed as well. And then Reverend Miller handed Caleb a copy of the certificate. Congratulations to you both. May God bless your union. Caleb shook the Reverend's hand, pressing a few coins into his palm as payment, and then he turned to Eleanor. We need to get supplies before we head to the cabin. It is too late to make the journey tonight, so we will stay at the boarding house and leave at first light. Is that acceptable to you? Yes, Eleanor said, grateful for the reprieve. The thought of an 8-mile journey into the wilderness after everything that had already happened today was overwhelming. They walked back to the main street together, and Eleanor was immediately aware of the change in how people looked at her. The whispers were still there, but now they were accompanied by curious glances at Caleb. And there was a new wariness in the way people watched them. It was clear that Caleb Stone commanded a certain respect in Silver Creek, even if he chose to live apart from the town. At the general store, Caleb purchased a significant quantity of supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, dried beans, bacon, cornmeal, molasses, and more. He added fabric for dresses, thread, needles, and a pair of sturdy boots in Eleanor's size. When she protested that it was too much, he simply shook his head. Winter comes early in the mountains and it stays late. We need to be prepared. And you will need warm clothes and good boots. What you are wearing now will not survive a month in the high country. The storekeeper, a thin man with nervous hands, kept glancing at Eleanor as he tallied the purchases. Will that be all, mister? Oh, Stone. Caleb looked at Eleanor. Is there anything you need? She thought of her empty carpet bag, of the few worn items she owned. Some soap, if possible, and perhaps some tea? Caleb nodded and added those items to the pile. He paid in cash, counting out the bills with easy confidence, and then he loaded everything into a large pack that he shouldered without any apparent effort. He handed Eleanor her carpet bag and gestured toward the boarding house across the street. The boarding house was a 2-story building with a sagging porch and faded curtains in the windows. A sour-faced woman answered Caleb's knock and looked them over with barely concealed disapproval. "I need a room for the night," Caleb said, "for myself and my wife." The word wife hung in the air, and the woman's eyebrows rose. "Your wife? I heard you got married today, Caleb Stone, to that girl who came in on the stage. Mighty quick work, even for you." "The room," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "Do you have one available or not?" "I have one. $2 for the night, and that includes breakfast in the morning." Caleb paid without haggling, and the woman led them upstairs to a small room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the street. It was clean but spare, and Eleanor felt a wave of awkwardness wash over her as the door closed behind them, leaving her alone with her new husband. Caleb set down his pack and her carpet bag, then turned to face her. "You are exhausted," he said bluntly. "You should rest. I need to go to the saloon and arrange for a horse and wagon to transport the supplies tomorrow. I will be back in an hour or so." Eleanor nodded, relieved and strangely disappointed at the same time. "Caleb, before you go, I need to tell you something." He waited, his expression patient. "The baby's father is a man named Thomas Whitmore. He's a wealthy merchant in St. Louis, and he's married. He made me promises he never intended to keep, and when I told him about the baby, he gave me $20 and told me to take care of it. I used that money to buy the stagecoach ticket west. I am telling you this because you have a right to know who I am and what I have done." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor braced herself for anger or judgment. Instead, he simply nodded. "This Thomas Whitmore is a fool and a coward. You loved him?" "I thought I did. Now I think I just loved the idea of being loved by someone like him. Someone respectable and established." She laughed bitterly. "I was naive." "You were young," Caleb corrected. "There is a difference. As for Thomas Whitmore, he does not exist in your life anymore. You are Eleanor Stone now, and that baby is my child. The past is done. All that matters is what we build from this day forward. Do you understand?" Eleanor felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she nodded, not trusting her voice. Caleb stepped closer and rested one large hand gently on her shoulder. "Rest now. I will be back soon, and we will have dinner together. Tomorrow we start our new life." He left the room quietly, and Eleanor sank down onto the narrow bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. This morning she had been alone, unwed, and terrified. Now she was married to a man she did not know, a mountain man who had looked at her desperate situation and offered a solution without asking for explanations or apologies. She did not know if she had made the right choice, but she knew she had made the only choice available to her. Eleanor removed her boots and lay down on the bed, intending to rest for just a few minutes. But exhaustion pulled her under like a tide, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the sound of the door opening and sat up quickly, disoriented in the fading light. Caleb entered carrying a tray with 2 plates of food, roasted chicken, potatoes, and carrots. The smell made Eleanor's stomach growl loudly. "When did you last eat?" Caleb asked, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "Yesterday morning," Eleanor admitted. "I did not have much money, so I tried to save it for lodging." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he did not comment. He simply pulled the chair over to the bed and handed her one of the plates. "Eat slowly. If you have not eaten in over a day, you do not want to make yourself sick." Eleanor took the plate gratefully and forced herself to eat at a measured pace, even though she wanted to devour everything in sight. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and ate his own meal in companionable silence. When they had both finished, he took the plates and set them aside, then poured water from the pitcher on the washstand into the basin. "You should wash up before bed," he said. "I will step outside for a few minutes to give you privacy." After he left, Eleanor quickly washed her face and hands, grateful for the small luxury of clean water and soap. She changed into her nightgown, the only one she owned, and was just brushing out her long brown hair when Caleb knocked softly on the door. "May I come in?" "Yes." He entered and closed the door behind him, and Eleanor became acutely aware that they were about to share a bed for the first time. Her heart began to race, and she clutched her hairbrush like a shield. Caleb seemed to sense her nervousness. He moved slowly, deliberately, as he removed his boots and his shirt, revealing a torso that was all muscle and scars, the body of a man who lived a hard physical life. He caught her looking and paused. "I know I'm not much to look at," he said quietly, "but I will never hurt you, Eleanor. I gave you my word on that." "You are not ugly," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. "You are just very different from anyone I have ever known." "That is likely true." He moved to the other side of the bed and lay down on top of the blanket, not under it. "I want you to understand something. You are my wife now, and eventually I hope we will have a true marriage in every sense. But you have been through a great deal today, and you are carrying a child. I will not force myself on you. When you are ready, you will tell me. Until then, we will share a bed for warmth and safety, nothing more. Is that clear?" Eleanor felt a rush of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "Yes, thank you." "You do not need to thank me for basic decency," Caleb said. He turned on his side, facing away from her. "Blow out the lamp and get under the blanket. It gets cold at night, even in September." Eleanor did as he said, climbing under the blanket and settling herself as far to the edge of the narrow bed as she could manage. But the bed was small, and she could feel the heat radiating from Caleb's body, could hear his breathing as it gradually slowed and deepened. Despite her exhaustion, she lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness and wondering what kind of life she had just committed herself to. Morning came early, with gray light filtering through the thin curtains and the sound of roosters crowing somewhere in town. Eleanor woke to find Caleb already up and dressed, packing his few belongings efficiently. When he noticed she was awake, he nodded toward the washstand. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes. We will eat, load the wagon, and leave. The journey to the cabin takes about 4 hours, depending on how rough the roads are. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Eleanor admitted, "but well enough to travel." "Good. If you need to rest during the journey, tell me. We can stop as often as necessary." They went downstairs to find the dining room filled with other boarders, all of whom stared openly at Eleanor and Caleb as they took their seats. The breakfast was simple but filling. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee. Eleanor ate everything on her plate, aware that she had no idea when her next meal might be. After breakfast, Caleb loaded their supplies into a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong horses. He helped Eleanor onto the seat beside him, his hands steadying her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Then they were moving, the wagon rolling out of Silver Creek and onto a dirt road that led north into the foothills. The Montana Territory landscape was stunning in the morning light. Rolling grasslands gave way to pine forests, and the mountains rose ahead of them like ancient guardians. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the coal smoke and city smells of St. Louis. Despite her anxiety about the unknown future, Eleanor found herself captivated by the wild beauty surrounding them. Caleb drove the wagon with easy competence, managing the horses and the rough road without apparent effort. He did not speak much, but his silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply the quiet of a man who was used to his own company and saw no need to fill the air with meaningless chatter. After about 2 hours, they stopped beside a clear stream to rest the horses and stretch their legs. Caleb helped Eleanor down from the wagon and watched carefully as she walked along the stream bank, one hand pressed to her lower back. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "My back aches, but that is normal these days. I'm fine." "We're about halfway there. Another 2 hours and we will be home." Home. The word felt strange and foreign. Eleanor tried to imagine what Caleb's cabin might be like and found she had no real frame of reference. Everything about this new life was utterly unknown. They continued their journey, climbing higher into the mountains. The road became narrower and rougher, little more than a track through the forest. Eleanor gripped the edge of the wagon seat as they bounced over ruts and rocks, grateful for Caleb's steady handling of the horses. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, they rounded a bend, and Eleanor saw the cabin for the first time. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a view of the mountains stretching away to the west. There was a small barn, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be a smokehouse. A garden plot, now mostly harvested, occupied one side of the clearing. "This is home," Caleb said simply. He drove the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake, then came around to help Eleanor down. It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm. I built it myself 3 years ago. Eleanor looked up at the cabin, at this place that was now her home, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. It was isolated, far from any neighbors or town. It was completely dependent on Caleb's ability to provide and protect. But it was also beautiful, in a stark, honest way. There was no pretense here, no false promises or hidden cruelty. Just a man, a cabin, and the wilderness. It is more than I expected, she said truthfully. Caleb seemed pleased by her response. Come inside. I will show you around and then we will unload the supplies. The interior of the cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft overhead. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot hanging from an iron hook. There was a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a cabinet for dishes and food, a trunk for storage, and a large bed in one corner covered with thick furs. The floor was made of smooth wooden planks, and there were glass windows with real shutters. Everything was clean and well maintained. Not at all what Eleanor had imagined from the term mountain man. The loft is for storage right now, Caleb explained, but we could convert it to a bedroom for children when the time comes. There's a root cellar under the trap door by the fireplace, and the well is just outside the back door. The privy is behind the barn, and I am working on building a bathing room attached to the cabin, but that will not be finished until next summer. You built all of this yourself? Eleanor asked, amazed. Most of it. I had help raising the walls and the roof beams, but everything else I did alone. I am not a man who likes to be idle. Over the next hour, Caleb unloaded the wagon while Eleanor explored her new home more thoroughly. She found the root cellar well stocked with potatoes, onions, carrots, and jars of preserved vegetables and fruit. The cabin was supplied with basic cooking equipment, though it was clear that Caleb's meals had been simple and functional rather than elaborate. There were books on a shelf by the bed which surprised her, a Bible, several volumes on animal husbandry and farming, and surprisingly, a collection of poetry. When Caleb came in with the last of the supplies, he found Eleanor holding the poetry book. You read poetry? She asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. My mother taught me to read when I was young, Caleb said, taking the book from her and setting it back on the shelf with unexpected care. She loved poetry. After she died, I kept her books, sometimes in the winter when I am snowed in for weeks, and it is good to have something to read besides the Bible and farming manuals. What happened to your parents? Eleanor asked softly. My father died when I was 15, logging accident. My mother passed 2 years later from pneumonia. I had a younger sister, but she died of fever when she was just 10. After my mother died, I could not stay in the settlement anymore. Too many memories, so I came up here and started over. He looked at Eleanor with those steady gray eyes. Everyone has a past, Eleanor. What matters is what we do with the present. That night, Caleb made dinner, venison stew with vegetables and biscuits that were surprisingly light and fluffy. They ate at the table as the sun set beyond the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was the first meal Eleanor had eaten in her own home in months, and despite the strangeness of everything, she felt something approaching contentment. After dinner, Caleb banked the fire and began preparing for bed. Eleanor changed into her nightgown behind a blanket that Caleb hung from the rafters to give her privacy, and when she emerged, she found he had already arranged the furs on the bed and was waiting patiently. The nights get cold up here, he said. We will need to sleep close for warmth, but I remember my promise, Eleanor. Nothing will happen until you are ready. They lay down together in the big bed, and this time Eleanor did not try to stay on the far edge. The cabin was indeed getting cold as the night deepened, and Caleb's body was warm and solid beside her. After a few minutes, he carefully put one arm around her, pulling her closer. Is this acceptable? He asked quietly. Yes, Eleanor whispered, and it was. Despite everything, despite the strangeness and the uncertainty, she felt safe here in this bed with this man who had married her to protect her, who asked permission before touching her, who kept his promises. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Caleb rose before dawn to tend to the animals and check his trap lines. Eleanor learned to manage the cabin, to cook on the massive fireplace, to bake bread in the Dutch oven, to mend clothes and wash dishes, and keep everything clean and organized. Her body was increasingly cumbersome as the pregnancy advanced, but she did what she could, determined to earn her place in this household. Caleb was patient with her inexperience, showing her how to manage the stove, how to preserve food, how to recognize the signs of changing weather. Thus he brought in fresh game regularly: deer, rabbit, wild turkey. He taught her how to prepare the meat, how to cure and smoke it for winter storage. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke clearly of his commitment to their arrangement. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and sometimes Caleb would read aloud from his mother's poetry books. His voice was rough but expressive, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to these quiet hours when the world outside disappeared, and it was just the two of them and the words of long-dead poets speaking of love and loss and beauty. One night, about 3 weeks after their wedding, Eleanor felt bold enough to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Caleb, why did you really ask me to marry you? You could have any woman you wanted. Why choose a pregnant stranger?" Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "I told you the truth," he finally said. "I was tired of being alone. But there's more to it than that. 3 years ago, before I came up here, I was engaged to be married. Her name was Sarah. She was beautiful and kind, and I thought we would spend our lives together. But her father found out I was just a logger with no prospects, and he forbade the marriage. He married her off to a banker from Denver instead. I heard later that she died in childbirth a year after the wedding, her and the baby both." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Eleanor could sense the pain beneath the words. "I could not save Sarah," Caleb continued, "but when I saw you on those church steps, alone and scared and carrying a child, I thought maybe I could save you instead. Maybe I could give you and that baby the life I could not give Sarah. It is selfish, in a way. I am not doing this entirely out of charity. I am doing it because it gives me a purpose beyond simple survival." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. She reached out and took Caleb's large, calloused hand in her smaller one. "It is not selfish. It is one of the kindest things anyone has ever done for me. And I will try my hardest to be a good wife to you, Caleb. I promise you that." He squeezed her hand gently. "You are already a good wife, Eleanor. You work hard, you do not complain, and you're trying to make this strange situation work, just as I am. That is all I can ask." That night when they went to bed, Eleanor curled up against Caleb's side and rested her head on his shoulder. She felt his surprise, felt him tense for just a moment, and then his arm came around her, holding her close. "Is this acceptable?" she asked, echoing his question from their first night. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is acceptable." October brought cold rains and early snow flurries. Eleanor's belly grew larger, the baby increasingly active. Caleb became more protective, insisting she rest more and work less. He brought in extra firewood, stacking it high against the cabin walls. He repaired the roof and checked every seal and gap, making sure the cabin would withstand the harsh winter to come. One afternoon, Eleanor was kneading bread dough when she felt a sharp pain in her lower back, different from the usual aches. She gasped and gripped the edge of the table, and immediately Caleb was there, his hands steadying her. "What is wrong? Is it the baby?" "I do not know," Eleanor admitted, frightened. "It hurt, but it's gone now." Caleb helped her to the bed and made her lie down. "I'm going to Silver Creek to fetch the midwife. Mrs. Patterson delivered half the babies in this county. She will know if something is wrong." "Caleb, it is starting to snow. The journey will be dangerous." "I do not care. I am not risking you or the baby." He was already pulling on his heavy coat and gathering supplies. "I will be back as soon as possible. Keep the fire going and stay in bed. If the pain comes back, time how long between the pains. Do you understand?" "Yes." He bent down and kissed her forehead, a gesture that had become natural between them over the past weeks. "I will be back soon. I promise." Then he was gone. Nirana and Eleanor was alone in the cabin for the first time since she had arrived. She lay on the bed, one hand on her belly, and tried not to be afraid. The baby kicked reassuringly, and Eleanor took that as a good sign. The hours passed slowly. The snow fell harder, and Eleanor kept the fire burning as Caleb had instructed. The pain did not return, and gradually she relaxed. Perhaps it had been nothing, just another discomfort of pregnancy. But she was still glad that Caleb had gone for the midwife. It would be good to have a woman's advice and reassurance. It was dark when she finally heard the wagon outside. Eleanor struggled to her feet and reached the door just as Caleb came in, followed by a sturdy woman with gray hair and sharp, kind eyes. "So you are the young bride Caleb Stone married in such a hurry," Mrs. Patterson said, on looking Eleanor over appraisingly. "Let me have a look at you, dear. Caleb, make yourself useful and heat some water." Over the next hour, Mrs. Patterson examined Eleanor thoroughly and asked dozens of questions about her symptoms, her health, and the baby's movements. Finally, she pronounced her verdict. "You are fine, my dear. What you felt was likely the baby settling lower in preparation for birth. It is normal, though it can be alarming if you have never experienced it before. By my estimation, you have about 6 weeks until this baby arrives, maybe a bit less. The baby is positioned well, and you are healthy and strong. I see no reason why you should not have a perfectly normal delivery." Eleanor felt relief wash over her. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I was so worried." The older woman patted her hand. "Oh, it is natural to worry with your first child, but you have a good man here who clearly cares for your well-being. Caleb Stone rode through a snowstorm to fetch me because he was worried about you. That tells me everything I need to know about his character." Mrs. Patterson stayed the night, sleeping in the loft, and in the morning, Caleb drove her back to Silver Creek, despite her protests that she could manage on her own. When he returned that evening, he looked exhausted, and Eleanor realized with a start that he had barely slept in 2 days. "You should rest," she said, guiding him to the bed. "You have been taking care of me. Now let me take care of you." She made him lie down, pulled off his boots, and covered him with the furs. Then she brought him hot soup and fresh bread, sitting beside him while he ate. When he finished, he caught her hand and pulled her down to lie beside him. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice low. "When you had that pain, all I could think about was Sarah dying in childbirth. I could not lose you, Eleanor, not when I have just found you." Eleanor felt her heart swell with emotion. "You are not going to lose me, Caleb. I am stronger than I look, and Mrs. Patterson said everything is fine, but I am glad you care. I have come to care for you too, very much." He looked at her with those gray eyes, and Eleanor saw something in them she had not seen before. Hope, and something that might be the beginning of love. He reached up and cupped her face gently, the same gesture he had made when he kissed her at their wedding. But this time, when his lips met hers, the kiss was not brief or chaste. It was deep and warm and full of emotion. A kiss that spoke of feelings too new and fragile to put into words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "You are my wife in name, Eleanor. I would like you to be my wife in truth, but only if you want that too." Eleanor thought about Thomas, about his false promises and his careless cruelty. Then she thought about Caleb, about his honesty and his kindness, about the way he had protected her and cared for her without asking anything in return. She thought about how she felt safe with him, how she had come to look forward to his presence, how the thought of losing him filled her with dread. "I want that," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in every way, Caleb. I want this to be a real marriage." His smile was slow and warm, transforming his usually stern face into something approaching handsome. "Then we will make it so." That night they came together as husband and wife truly for the first time. Caleb was gentle and patient, mindful of her condition, and Eleanor found herself surprised by the tenderness a man so large and rough could show. There was no shame or guilt, only the simple rightness of two people choosing each other, building something real out of the broken pieces of their pasts. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together under the furs, Caleb traced gentle patterns on Eleanor's swollen belly. "When is your birthday?" he asked suddenly. "June 15th. Why?" "Because I realized I do not know these basic things about you. Your birthday, your favorite color, what you like to eat, what makes you laugh. We got married so fast. We skipped all the normal parts of courtship. I would like to know you, Eleanor. I would like to learn everything about you." Eleanor smiled in the darkness. "My favorite color is blue. I like apple pie and roasted chicken. I laugh at silly jokes and at babies doing funny things. I used to love to dance, though I have not danced in years. What about you? My birthday is March 2nd. I do not have a favorite color, but I suppose if I had to choose, it would be green, like the trees. I like coffee strong and black. I laugh at animals acting foolish and at my own mistakes. I never learned to dance properly, but I would like to learn if you would teach me. I will teach you, Eleanor promised. When the baby is born and I am recovered, I will teach you to dance right here in this cabin. They talked for hours that night, sharing stories and secrets, learning each other in the way that new lovers do. And when they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both felt that perhaps against all odds, they had found something precious and worth fighting for. November came with heavy snows that blanketed the mountains in white. Caleb had been right about the need to prepare early. They were snowed in for days at a time, the cabin a warm sanctuary against the howling winds and bitter cold. Eleanor grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she did not complain. She kept the cabin clean, cooked the meals, and worked on sewing baby clothes from the fabric Caleb had bought in Silver Creek. Caleb stayed close to home now, not wanting to be far away when the baby came. He spent his days cutting firewood, tending the animals, and making repairs around the cabin. In the evenings, he would rub Eleanor's aching back and feet, and they would talk about their plans for the future. "We should think of names," Eleanor said one night as they sat by the fire. "If it is a girl, I would like to name her Rose, after my mother. If it is a boy, I thought perhaps we could name him after your father." "My father's name was Henry," Caleb said softly. "He was a good man. He would have been honored to have a grandson carry his name. Then Henry it is, if we have a son, and Rose, if we have a daughter." Caleb placed his hand on Eleanor's belly, feeling the baby move beneath his palm. "This child is blessed to have you as a mother, Eleanor. You are strong and brave and kind, everything a child could want." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, as they so often did these days. "And this child is blessed to have you as a father. You did not have to take us in, but you did. You have given us a home and a name and safety. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." "Do not be grateful," Caleb said, pulling her close. "Be happy. That's all I want, for you and the baby to be happy and safe." 2 weeks later, on a cold November night when the snow was piling high against the cabin walls, Eleanor woke to a sharp pain in her belly. This time, she knew immediately what it was. The baby was coming. "Caleb," she said, shaking his shoulder, "wake up. It is time." He was awake instantly, years of survival training making him alert at a moment's notice. "Are you certain?" "Yes. The pains are regular now, about 15 minutes apart." Caleb got up and began moving with efficient purpose. He built up the fire until the cabin was warm and bright. He boiled water and set out clean cloths, the way Mrs. Patterson had instructed when they had visited her in town 2 weeks earlier. He helped Eleanor out of bed and into a clean nightgown, supporting her through the pains that were coming more frequently now. "I should go for Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said, worried. "You should not do this alone." "There is no time," Eleanor gasped as another pain gripped her. "The snow is too deep and the baby is coming fast. You will have to help me, Caleb. I trust you." His face was pale, but he nodded. "Tell me what to do." The next several hours were the hardest of Eleanor's life. The pains came harder and faster, and she gripped Caleb's hands so tightly she was certain she was leaving bruises. But he never complained, never left her side. He supported her when she needed to walk, gave her water when her mouth was dry, wiped her face with cool cloths, and spoke words of encouragement in his deep, steady voice. "You are doing so well, Eleanor. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. Just a little longer now. You can do this. I am right here with you." Finally, as dawn was breaking outside and painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor felt the overwhelming urge to push. Caleb helped her into position, and with every ounce of strength she possessed, Eleanor bore down. "I can see the head," Caleb said, his voice shaking with emotion. "One more push, Eleanor. Just one more." Eleanor gathered her last reserves of strength and pushed with everything she had. She felt a sensation of release, and then suddenly there was a thin, angry cry filling the cabin. Caleb was laughing and crying at the same time as he caught the baby and quickly wrapped it in a clean cloth. "It is a boy," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We have a son, Eleanor, a strong, healthy son." He placed the baby on Eleanor's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature who was wailing his displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers that gripped her own with surprising strength. "Hello, Henry," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world, my precious boy." Caleb finished helping Eleanor through the final stage of labor, and then he cleaned up the baby and wrapped him in soft flannel. He helped Eleanor into a clean nightgown and into the bed with fresh linens, and then he placed baby Henry in her arms. "You did it," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at them both with an expression of pure awe. "You are magnificent, Eleanor. I have never seen anything so brave or beautiful in my entire life." "We did it," Eleanor corrected. "I could not have done it without you, Caleb. You were wonderful." Caleb reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and Henry's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's large, calloused finger. The look on Caleb's face was one of complete and utter love. "Hello, son," he said softly. "I'm your father, and I'm going to spend every day of my life making sure you are safe and loved and happy. That is my promise to you." Eleanor watched her husband with her newborn son and felt her heart swell with a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. This man, he who had been a stranger just 3 months ago, had become her partner, her protector, and now the father of her child in every way that mattered. She had left St. Louis in shame and desperation, but she had found something in the Montana wilderness that was worth more than any respectability: a family built on honesty, respect, and genuine affection. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant care for the baby. Henry proved to be a healthy, hungry infant who demanded attention at all hours. Caleb helped with everything, changing diapers, walking the floor with a crying baby, letting Eleanor rest when she was exhausted. He was completely devoted to both mother and child, and Eleanor fell more in love with him every day. By mid-December, they had settled into a routine. Eleanor was recovering well from the birth, and Henry was growing visibly stronger. The cabin was cozy and warm despite the raging blizzards outside. They were completely cut off from the rest of the world, the three of them in their own small universe. One evening, as Eleanor nursed Henry by the fire and Caleb prepared dinner, she found herself thinking about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been living in a St. Louis boarding house, alone and pregnant and terrified. Now, she was in a mountain cabin with a husband who loved her and a healthy son, and she was happier than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, noticing her quiet smile. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Eleanor said honestly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach in Silver Creek, I thought my life was over. I thought I would end up destitute or worse. But instead, I found you. You gave me everything I needed when I had nothing to offer in return." Caleb left the stove and came to sit beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders and looked down at Henry, who was nursing contentedly. "You offered me plenty in return, Eleanor. You offered me a reason to come down from this mountain and be part of the world again. You offered me a home that feels like more than just a shelter. You offered me a family. Before you and Henry, I was just surviving. Now I am living. That is worth more than all the gold in California." That night, after Henry was asleep in the cradle Caleb had built, Eleanor and Caleb made love slowly and tenderly, celebrating the bond that had grown between them. Afterwards, as they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor made a confession. "I think I am falling in love with you, Caleb Stone. I did not expect it, but it is happening anyway." She felt him tense in surprise, and then his arms tightened around her. "I think I am falling in love with you too, Eleanor Stone. Maybe I've been falling since the moment I saw you on those church steps. I just did not know what to call it. Can we call it love now?" "Yes," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "We can call it love." Christmas came, and though they were isolated in their mountain cabin, Caleb made sure it was special. He fashioned toys for Henry, a wooden rattle and a soft rabbit made from fur. For Eleanor, he presented a beautiful set of hair combs he had carved from antler, the craftsmanship detailed and delicate. Eleanor gave him a new shirt she had sewn in secret, made from the fabric he had bought months ago. They had a feast of roasted venison, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar, and a dried apple pie that Eleanor had made. They sang Christmas carols while Henry slept peacefully in his cradle, and they read the Christmas story from the Bible by firelight. It was simple and quiet, but it was perfect. As the new year of 1878 arrived, Eleanor reflected on how much could change in a single year. She had started 1877 as a naive girl being courted by a married man. She ended it as a wife, mother, and woman who had found her strength in the most unlikely of places. The winter continued long and hard, but the cabin was warm and their supplies held out. Caleb proved to be an attentive father, often taking Henry from Eleanor so she could rest or have time to herself. But he would walk the floor with the baby, singing off-key lullabies, or simply sit by the fire with Henry cradled against his broad chest. "You are a natural at this," Eleanor observed one evening, watching him rock Henry to sleep. "I had practice with my little sister when she was a baby," Caleb said. "My mother was often unwell, so I helped care for her. I always wanted children of my own, but I thought that chance had passed me by. Now I have Henry, and I have you. It is more than I ever hoped for." In February, when Henry was 3 months old, there was a brief break in the weather. Caleb took the opportunity to make the journey to Silver Creek for supplies and to let everyone know that the baby had arrived safely. He brought Eleanor and Henry with him, bundled against the cold in the wagon. The town was curious to see Caleb Stone's wife and child, and Eleanor was surprised by how many people were genuinely kind. Mrs. Patterson fussed over Henry, proclaiming him a fine, healthy boy. The Reverend congratulated them and invited them to bring Henry for baptism when the weather improved. Even the sour-faced woman from the boarding house admitted that Eleanor looked well. But the real surprise came when they were leaving the general store. A well-dressed woman approached them hesitantly, her eyes red as if she had been crying. "Mr. Stone? Mrs. Stone? My name is Catherine Whitmore. I am Thomas Whitmore's wife." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Caleb immediately moved closer, his hand coming to rest protectively on her back. Catherine continued, her voice shaking. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted you to know that Thomas died 2 months ago." His heart gave out suddenly. "When I was going through his papers, I found letters he had written but never sent, confessing what he had done to you, Eleanor, how he had lied and used you and sent you away." She pulled an envelope from her handbag and held it out with trembling hands. "He left you money in his will. Not a fortune, but enough to make things right," he said. "I've arranged for the bank to hold it for you. I also wanted to apologize. I knew Thomas was not faithful, but I never knew about you specifically. If I had, perhaps I could have done something. I'm so very sorry." Eleanor took the envelope, her mind reeling. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have nothing to apologize for. Thomas was the one who lied to both of us. Nevertheless, I am sorry for your suffering." Catherine looked at Henry, sleeping peacefully in Eleanor's arms. "Your son is beautiful. I hope you are happy here." "I am," Eleanor said, and realized it was true. "I'm very happy." After Catherine left, Caleb helped Eleanor back into the wagon. As they drove out of town, he finally spoke. "Are you all right?" "I think so. It is strange to have that chapter of my life suddenly closed like that. Thomas is dead, and somehow he tried to make amends at the end. I do not know how I feel about it." "You do not have to feel anything about it," Caleb said firmly. "He is part of your past, and the past is done. What matters is right now, here in this wagon, with our son and our future ahead of us. That money is yours to do with as you please, but it does not change anything between us. You are my wife, and Henry is my son, and that is all that matters to me." Eleanor leaned against his solid shoulder. "That is all that matters to me too." When they got home that night, Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a banknote for $500 and a letter in Thomas's handwriting. She read it once, slowly, and then handed it to Caleb. The letter was full of apologies and regrets, admissions of guilt and expressions of shame. Thomas wrote that he had been a coward and a villain, that he had thrown away something precious for the sake of appearances, that he hoped Eleanor had found happiness despite his betrayal. He asked for forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked when Caleb finished reading. "I think he was telling the truth, finally. When it was too late to matter." Caleb folded the letter and handed it back to her. "I think he realized what he had lost and regretted it. But remorse does not undo harm. You get to decide if you forgive him or not. Either way is acceptable." Eleanor thought for a long moment, then walked to the fireplace and threw the letter into the flames. "I forgive him, because holding on to anger will only hurt me. But I do not need his words or his money to feel whole. I have already moved on. I have a life that is better than anything I could have had with him." Caleb came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "What do you want to do with the money?" "I think we should save it for Henry's future, maybe for his education, or to help him get started in life when he is grown. It can be something good that comes from something bad." "That sounds wise," Caleb agreed. "Whatever you decide, I will support you." As winter finally gave way to spring, the mountain cabin came alive with new energy. The snow melted, revealing the green grass and wildflowers beneath. Henry was growing quickly, becoming more alert and interactive every day. He would smile at his parents and make happy gurgling sounds, and both Eleanor and Caleb were completely besotted with him. In April, on a warm, sunny day, Eleanor reminded Caleb of his promise. "You said you would learn to dance with me when I recovered from the birth. I'm recovered now." Caleb looked uncomfortable. "Eleanor, I am not a graceful man. I will likely step on your feet." "I do not care. I want to dance with my husband." So Eleanor hummed a waltz, and Caleb held her as they moved around the cabin floor in an approximation of dancing. He was clumsy and awkward, and he did step on her feet twice, but he was also earnest in trying his best, and Eleanor loved him all the more for it. Henry watched from his cradle, waving his little fists, and Eleanor laughed with pure joy. This was her life now, a mountain cabin, a strong husband who loved her, a healthy son, and moments of simple happiness that were worth more than any ballroom dance in St. Louis society. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor and Caleb worked together to plant a larger garden, expand the chicken coop, and make improvements to the cabin. Mrs. Patterson visited in June, bringing fabric and supplies and staying for a week to help Eleanor with the baby and to teach her more about managing a frontier household. "You have done well for yourself, Eleanor," Mrs. Patterson said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Caleb play with Henry on a blanket in the grass. "I will admit, I had my doubts when Caleb married you so suddenly. But I can see now that you two are well suited. He is a good man, and you are a strong woman. Together, you make a good team." "I think so too," Eleanor agreed. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Mrs. Patterson. I came west in disgrace, and I found a home instead." "That is the thing about the West," the older woman said with a smile. "It does not care much about your past. It only cares about what you can do today and tomorrow. You have built a good life here, and you should be proud of that." In July, they took Henry to Silver Creek for his baptism. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband standing as godparents. The whole town turned out, and Eleanor realized with surprise that she and Caleb had become part of the community, no longer outsiders but respected members of Silver Creek society. After the baptism, there was a celebration at the church with food and music. Caleb danced with Eleanor, much improved from his first clumsy attempts, and several other men asked for a dance as well. But Eleanor only had eyes for her husband, for the way he watched her with pride and love, for the way he held Henry so carefully while she danced. That night, as they drove home under a sky full of stars, Eleanor felt at peace with her life in a way she never had before. She had left St. Louis in shame and fear, but she had found something infinitely better in the Montana mountains. She had found love, a real love, the kind that was built on respect and partnership and shared hardship. She had found a home, not just a building, but a place where she belonged. And she had found a family, not the one she had dreamed of as a girl, but something stronger and more real. As summer progressed, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear or shame, only joy. Caleb was thrilled, immediately becoming even more protective and attentive than before. "Are you happy about this?" Eleanor asked him one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I am happier than I have words to express," Caleb said. "Henry will have a brother or sister. We are building a family, Eleanor. A real, lasting family. That is everything I ever wanted." "Me too," Eleanor whispered. "I love you, Caleb Stone. I love you with everything I am." "I love you too, Eleanor. You are my heart, my home, my everything. You and our children are my whole world." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, with Caleb there to support her every step of the way, and with the confidence that comes from having done it once before. In March of 1879, on Caleb's birthday, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose, after Eleanor's mother, and she was a tiny, perfect baby, with Eleanor's brown eyes and Caleb's dark hair. Henry, now 16 months old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle and babble to her, and Caleb and Eleanor would watch their children with hearts full of love. "This is what I want our life to be," Eleanor said one evening as they sat together by the fire. Henry playing with his wooden toys at their feet, and Rose sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "Just this, forever. Our family, our home, our love. Nothing else matters." "Nothing else matters," Caleb agreed, pulling her close. "We have everything we need right here." As the years passed, the Stone family grew and thrived in their mountain home. A third child arrived in 1881, another son they named Jacob. Then a fourth in 1883, a daughter named Sarah after Caleb's lost love, a gesture that brought tears to his eyes when Eleanor suggested it. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with a second story added and more rooms built on. Caleb proved to be an excellent father, patient and loving with all the children. He taught them to ride, to hunt, to respect the wilderness and their place in it. And Eleanor taught them to read and write, to cook and sew, to value hard work and honesty. Silver Creek grew as well, evolving from a rough frontier town into a more established community. Caleb served on the town council, and Eleanor helped found a school. They were respected members of the community, known for their strong marriage and their well-raised children. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1887, Caleb surprised Eleanor by taking her on a trip, just the two of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson. They rode up into the high mountains to a place Caleb had discovered years ago, a meadow full of wildflowers with a view that stretched for miles. "This is where I came after Sarah died," Caleb said as they sat together on a blanket, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "This is where I decided to stop running from my pain and start building a new life. I came back here the day before I met you, actually. I sat right here and asked God to show me what to do with my life, how to stop being so alone. And the next day, I arrived on the stagecoach," Eleanor said softly. "The next day, you arrived, and everything changed. You were my answer, Eleanor, you and Henry and all our children. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You took a broken man and made him whole." Eleanor turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "You did the same for me, Caleb. You saw me at my lowest moment and offered me dignity and hope. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. But you are my hero, my husband, my partner, my everything." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, and it was just as sweet and meaningful as their first kiss 10 years earlier in the Reverend's front room. "Tell me honestly," Eleanor said later as they lay together under the stars. "Do you have any regrets? Any wishes that your life had turned out differently?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I regret that my parents and sister did not live to see our family. I regret that I could not save Sarah. But as for the rest, no regrets, Eleanor, not a single one. My life is exactly what it should be. You are exactly who I am meant to be with. This is my path, and I am grateful for every step of it, even the painful ones, because they led me to you." "I have no regrets either," Eleanor said. Even the hard parts, even the shame and fear of being pregnant and alone, even Thomas and his betrayal, all of it was necessary to bring me here, to you, to our family. I would not change anything." They spent 3 days in the mountains, just the two of them, reconnecting as a couple rather than just as parents. When they returned home, the children swarmed them with hugs and stories, and Eleanor realized that this was true wealth, not money or status or social standing, but love and family and belonging. As the children grew older, Henry showed a talent for woodworking like his father. He would spend hours in Caleb's workshop, learning to craft furniture and tools. Rose was clever with numbers and letters, always reading and asking questions about everything. Jacob was the adventurer, always exploring the woods and bringing home interesting rocks and plants. And Sarah was the nurturer, always caring for injured animals and helping her mother with the younger children. Yes, there were more children, 2 more sons, Daniel and Thomas, born in 1885 and 1887. The name Thomas had been Eleanor's choice, a final act of forgiveness and closure, a way of taking that painful name and making it part of their family story in a positive way. By 1890, 12 years after that fateful September day when Eleanor had stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Creek, the Stone family was well established and thriving. Caleb was 41 years old, his dark hair showing threads of silver, but his body still strong and capable. Eleanor was 33, no longer the scared pregnant girl she had been, but a confident woman who knew her worth and her strength. They sat together on the porch one evening, watching their 6 children play in the yard as the sun set over the mountains. Henry, now 12, was teaching Jacob and Thomas how to whittle. Rose and Sarah were making flower crowns for each other, and baby Daniel was toddling around under everyone's watchful eye. "Did you ever think it would be like this?" Eleanor asked, leaning against Caleb's shoulder in the comfortable way of long-married couples. "No," Caleb admitted. "I thought I would grow old alone on this mountain, maybe eventually get trampled by a bear or freeze in a blizzard. I never imagined this. A wife I love more every day, children who make me proud, a home full of laughter and warmth. This is beyond anything I dreamed possible." "I thought I would end up destitute or dead," Eleanor said quietly. "I thought my life was over when Thomas rejected me. But it was really just beginning. Everything I have, everything we have built together, it all started because you looked at a desperate pregnant woman on the church steps and saw someone worth saving." "I did not save you," Caleb corrected gently. "We saved each other. You gave me as much as I gave you, probably more. You gave me a reason to be a better man. You gave me hope and joy and love. That is not something one person does for another, that is something 2 people build together." Eleanor smiled and kissed him softly. "Then I am glad we built it together, and I am glad we have years and years ahead of us to keep building." "Years and years," Caleb agreed. Growing old together, watching our children grow and have children of their own, that is my prayer, Eleanor, that God gives us long lives to enjoy this beautiful thing we have created." As darkness fell and the children were called inside for bed, Eleanor and Caleb remained on the porch for a while longer, wrapped in blankets against the chill and in each other's arms against the uncertainties of life. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" Eleanor asked. "You said marriage is as simple or as complicated as people make it, and you were a simple man with simple needs." "I remember. You were right. We have kept it simple. Love, respect, partnership, commitment. No games, no lies, no cruelty. Just 2 people choosing each other every single day. That is the secret, is it not? Choosing each other over and over again." "That is the secret," Caleb confirmed. "And I choose you, Eleanor Stone, today and every day for the rest of my life. I choose you too, Caleb Stone, forever and always." They went inside to their home, to their children, to the life they had built from nothing but faith and hope and love. And as Eleanor looked around at her family gathered by the firelight, she sent up a prayer of gratitude for the day she had come west pregnant with no ring on her finger, and for the mountain man who had put one there before sundown came. That single act of unexpected kindness had transformed both their lives, creating something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their individual pain. In the years that followed, the Stone family continued to thrive. The children grew and married and had children of their own. Henry married a girl from town and started his own carpentry business. Rose became a teacher at the school Eleanor had helped found. Jacob went into ranching with his wife's family. Sarah married a doctor and moved to Helena but visited often. Thomas and Daniel were still young but showed promise in their own ways. Caleb and Eleanor grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships, as all families do. Illness, difficult winters, financial setbacks, losses. But they faced everything together, their partnership as strong as the day they had spoken their vows. On September 20th, 1900, their 22nd wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. If the cabin had been expanded so many times, it was now a substantial house, comfortable and welcoming. Caleb had built chairs and tables enough for everyone, and Eleanor had prepared a feast with the help of her daughters and daughters-in-law. As the family gathered around the long table, Caleb stood to make a toast. He was 51 years old now, his hair more silver than dark, his face weathered by decades in the mountain sun. But his eyes were still that same striking gray, and they were full of love as he looked at his wife. 22 years ago today, Caleb began, his deep voice commanding attention, I met a woman on the steps of a church in Silver Creek. She was alone, afraid, and in desperate need of help. I offered her marriage, a purely practical arrangement that would benefit us both. She accepted, and we stood before Reverend Miller and spoke vows neither of us fully understood at the time. He paused and held out his hand to Eleanor, who rose and came to stand beside him. What I could not have known then, Caleb continued, was that I was not offering her a practical arrangement. I was offering her my heart, my future, my whole life, and she gave me the same in return. She gave me Henry, who I claim as my son in every way that matters. She gave me Rose, Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Daniel. She gave me a home, a family, a reason to live rather than merely survive. Caleb turned to face Eleanor directly, taking both her hands in his. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Stone. You are my wife, my partner, my love, my everything. I would make the same choice again today without hesitation. I would offer you that ring again, and I would promise to put it on your finger before sundown came, and I would mean every word. Eleanor was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. And I would say yes again, Caleb Stone. I would choose you every time, in every life, in every universe. You saved me when I needed saving, and then you loved me when I needed loving, and you have stood by me through everything for 22 years. You are my husband, my home, my heart. They kissed while their family applauded and cheered, and then everyone raised their glasses in a toast to the couple who had beaten the odds, who had turned a desperate bargain into a love story for the ages. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Caleb and Eleanor walked hand in hand to the meadow where they had spent their 10th anniversary. The moon was full, bathing the wildflowers in silver light, and the mountains rose around them like ancient protectors. Tell me honestly, Caleb said, echoing Eleanor's question from years ago. Is this the life you imagined for yourself when you were a girl? No, Eleanor said honestly. When I was a girl, I imagined a life in the city, with fancy dresses and social calls and all the trappings of civilization. I imagined a husband who was polished and educated, children who grew up to be doctors and lawyers and society ladies. She paused and looked around at the wild, beautiful landscape, at the cabin she could just see in the distance, at the strong, weathered man beside her. But this life right here, and is better than anything I imagined, because this life is real. It is built on truth and hard work and genuine love. My husband is not polished, but he is honest and kind and strong. My children are not society people, but they are good people, happy people, people who know how to work and love and appreciate what they have. This life is better because it is mine, truly mine, earned and built and cherished. I am glad, Caleb said softly, because this life is mine too, and I treasure every moment of it. Every morning I wake up with you beside me as a gift. Every meal we share, every conversation, every challenge we face together. All of it is precious to me. They stood together in the moonlight. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate pasts. They had 6 children, 8 grandchildren so far, with more on the way, a home they had built with their own hands, and a love that had been tested by time and emerged stronger for it. Do you think our story is over? Eleanor asked. Have we lived the most exciting parts already? Caleb laughed, a warm sound that echoed across the meadow. Our story is not over, my love. We still have years ahead of us. We will watch more grandchildren be born, see our children achieve great things, celebrate more anniversaries, face more challenges, share more joys. Our story continues every day we draw breath, every day we wake up and choose each other again. Then let us make sure the rest of our story is just as good as the beginning, Eleanor said. Let us fill it with love and laughter and family and all the things that make life worth living. Agreed, Caleb said, and he pulled her into his arms for a kiss that was as passionate and meaningful as any they had shared in all their years together. They walked back to the house, hand in hand, through the wildflowers and under the stars, two people who had started as strangers, bound by necessity, and become soulmates bound by love. And as they entered their home and closed the door behind them, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find. A love that would last forever, a family that would carry on their legacy, and a happiness that no amount of hardship could diminish. The story of Eleanor and Caleb Stone became something of a legend in Silver Creek and the surrounding territory. People would tell it as an example of how unexpected blessings can come from desperate circumstances, how love can grow in the most unlikely soil, how two broken people can make each other whole. But for Eleanor and Caleb themselves, it was simply their life, beautiful in its simplicity, rich in its blessings, perfect in its imperfections. They had taken a moment of crisis and turned it into a lifetime of love. They had taken a hasty marriage made from necessity and transformed it into a partnership that would stand the test of time. And every September 20th, for the rest of their long lives, they would remember that day when a pregnant woman with no ring on her finger met a mountain man who put one there before sundown came, and how that single act of compassion had changed both their lives forever, creating a love story that would echo through generations. Years later, when both Caleb and Eleanor had passed into old age and then peacefully into eternity, their children and grandchildren would gather at the mountain house and tell the story of how their family began. They would speak of Eleanor's courage in leaving St. Louis alone and pregnant, of Caleb's compassion in offering marriage to a stranger, of the love that had grown between two people who had every reason to remain strangers and every reason to fail. But they had not failed. They had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, building not just a marriage, but a dynasty, a family that would carry their values and their love forward into the future. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Caleb had spoken on the day they met. Sometimes the most practical decisions lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. Eleanor had needed a husband and a home. Caleb had needed a wife and a family. They had made a trade, a bargain, a practical arrangement. But somewhere along the way, in the quiet moments, by the fire and the hard work of building a life together, that arrangement had transformed into something rare and precious, true love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond. And so their story ends not with sadness or regret, but with joy and gratitude. Two souls found each other in the vast wilderness of the Montana Territory, made promises they kept, built a life they treasured, and created a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was also a perfect one, proof that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start with a desperate bargain and end with a lifetime of happiness. The mountain cabin still stands, now preserved by the family as a testament to their ancestors' courage and love. And visitors who come to see it often remark on the feeling of peace and contentment that seems to linger in the air, as if the love that was built there left an imprint that time cannot erase. That is the legacy of Eleanor and Caleb Stone. Not wealth or fame, but love, enduring and true, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with a single step, taken in faith, toward an uncertain future that turns out to be exactly what was needed all along.